Hi, everyone, and welcome to Rethinking Balance Sheets, May 7th, 2021. And today we have an exciting show with us. We're joined by Arvind Patmarajah, founder of Startfund Malaysia, who will be coming to discuss the domestic startup ecosystem and how impact enterprise organization like Startfund aims to increase the number of startups in Malaysia. But before that, as always, I will have my co-host and my good friend Ravi who will be joining us today. So Ravi, welcome to our show. Welcome to Rethinking Balance Sheets. And it's been a very interesting couple of I think we're up to our 10th episode now, right? I think
that's right.
And we've been talking about a whole bunch of things from looking at how to relook at your balance sheet, your cash flow, understanding some of the impact this COVID pandemic is imparting on many of our startups, on many of our SMEs actually, primarily. We've looked at different sources of funding from the lead market. I think that was very interesting, to even Singapore, right? Last week where we talked about what's happening in the Singapore scene and how they are raising funds. Give me a quick a sense of what your thoughts are, in terms of what's happening right now with another movement control in Malaysia, the situation in India, and the continuing raging pandemic, right? That befronts us.
Okay. I think the good news last week for everybody who went around and got the AstraZeneca, that's at least a little bit good for everyone. So I think that got a lot of people a little happier. Yeah.
Yep.
But the pandemic, obviously, it's obviously in Singapore, in India, is heart wrenching. In Malaysia, I think that I've seen a lot of articles now starting to come out. The earlier optimistic outlooks for economic recovery for this year are all being pared down. Not surprising on that. But I always take an optimistic view. The pandemic will end. In fact, yesterday I was watching CNBC. Interesting that the US is really going to see a V-shaped recovery. That means the growth will be higher than what they originally expected at the start of the pandemic. That's an incredible result. Just the amount of innovation and change that's come out of this pandemic, which I've always argued is similar to the Second World War. A lot of innovation came out through that period. We're seeing that. And we got a great speaker here who's absolutely passionate about startups and innovation and stuff like that. It's going to come from a lot of, for us and like you, we've all gone into business. I doubt I would have had the kind of thinking I have today if I wasn't in business rather than continuing to have a senior management post in an organization. It's forced you to think creative, and the more we can encourage people through that's great. And for all those guys with the startups, if you want to think through your balance sheets, how to grow it from the tiny little things that we start up with to, we were just talking about Google. And how many people had invested in Google and Uber, which we even know, right? Right at the beginning, and that's created fortunes, that unimaginable fortunes. I'm excited to have Arvind on the show today. One thing, Roshan, I just want to wish all our viewers out there Selamat Hari Raya. But there will be no show next Friday. We'll pick up after Hari Raya with another exciting speaker.
Just to people are excited. I see so many people online. Hey, crazy times, but the show must go on. And David Abdullah, who says good work, guys, and Hannah Aslan, who's on the show, he said definitely food for thought, and I've just tuned in. And there's so much more that's going to come in. We're going to have exciting thoughts, and we're just starting. This is an intro, right? I don't think there's many insights, but Ravi, we seem to have hit a chord with some of our viewers excited by what's to come. Arvind, you want to quickly introduce Arvind? And Arvind, welcome to our show. Really glad to have you. Ravi, you want to say a few words about Arvind?
Actually, Arvind is just a very, very smart guy. You can find him usually in the morning at Huckleberry, working through and thinking on ideas on how he can help startups, running conferences, etc. I understand he's a great poker player as well. That's another of his many talents. But we are excited to hear what he's going to do. He's key in the startup scene in Malaysia. So that's really where we are coming from. And remember, we started this show to help, the SMEs. Startups are all about SMEs. And that's what's exciting about today's show.
So Arvind, welcome to the show. Arvind Patmarajah, founder of Startfund, right? And part of it is you want to help the domestic startup ecosystem, especially in Malaysia, and how you want to drive more impact-driven organizations, essentially. So you want to increase the number of startups, and there are others, right, like Cradle and Magic to some extent, and MDAC and others that also make it their mission to drive the number of startups up. But how do you plan on driving, more importantly, not just the number of startups, I think the impact in terms of how do you drive impact-driven startups or impact enterprise missions? What's your plan on doing that?
So hi Roshan, hi Ravi. Thanks for having me on the show. Good morning. So there's a fair bit to unpack there. So let's start with the government agencies, right? We have, as you mentioned, Magic, Cradle. We have a bunch of different agencies. In fact, last I checked, it was somewhere in the region of 40 plus government agencies that touch entrepreneurship in some way or form, right? So it's intuitive to realize that if you have 40 plus agencies that that are working independently across different ministries, across federal government, across state government, the fragmentation is insane, right? The duplication of resources, the overlap of coverage areas. So what I realized with Startfund pre-COVID, the word fund in Startfund often gives the misnomer that I'm an investor, which I'm not, right? The word fund was in there because it's actually a portmanteau of two words, right? Startup and funding, right? So funding is the lifeblood of any new startup. So initially pre-COVID, Startfund had a much smaller ambitions of connecting early stage startups with Singaporean with the venture capital ecosystem in Singapore, right? Of course, borders were shut, and we were not a virtual platform, right? We were very much encouraging a face-to-face aspect to meeting investors. So with the borders shut, I had to reimagine Startfund, and starting April last year, I started looking at this problem of fragmentation, and I realized that there was no single one-stop destination for entrepreneurs, no single clearinghouse of information, and there was a lot of mess, a lot of silos, with regards to just all the elements of the startup ecosystem. So Startfund's first mission was to build a definitive Malaysia startup registry. Right?
Okay.
I mean, we should be able to definitively answer the question, how many active startups do we have in Malaysia? How many startups were created in Malaysia? How many startups were created this year? How many startups do we have by industry? How many startups do we have by stage? And while different government agencies have different databases, these databases vary wildly in terms of numbers and in terms of categorizations as well, right? So there's no one single standard for what is a fintech startup versus an e-commerce startup, what the thresholds are, what the definitions are, and this is where we decided to start. So when we went back to first principles, we looked at the most important thing: how do we create what makes a vibrant startup ecosystem? And I realized, after talking to many other ecosystem builders, we just need more startups in Malaysia. That is the raison d'etre of Startfund, right?
Yep,
you want to turbocharge the ecosystem, we just need more. And the reason is that it takes, a successful unicorn startup, if everyone is interested in that, is built on the carcasses of hundreds of failed startups, right?
Yep.
And this is not waste. These failed startups are not waste. Somebody who worked for a failed startup will eventually go and work for another startup that becomes successful. So it's this group think or sort of a huge collection of wisdom that ultimately comes from all this failure to create a success. But if you want more success at one end of the funnel, you need to have more inputs on the other end of the funnel. So we, as an impact enterprise, decided that we would take a five-prong approach on how to help create more startups. Number one, we would map the ecosystem, and we would create better databases for the ecosystem. Number two, we would champion incubation. That means taking entrepreneurs and turning them into startups, as opposed to taking existing startups and trying to accelerate them. We would champion incubation as the best way to create more, as an engine of startup creation. Number three, we would try to tackle the talent problem for Startfund, for the startup ecosystem. Everyone talks about how we have no talent or minimal talent or talent's hard to find. It's a huge global marketplace. Singapore doesn't really have a hinterland of talent to speak of, but they are a great magnet for digital nomads around the world. How can we become that? And then the fourth element would be to create an academy. So we are launching Startfund Academy in the middle of the year, where we want to focus on a pre-startup boot camp. That means we catch entrepreneurs before they start their startup. We try to give them exposure, teach them about lean startup methodology, customer development, how to talk to your customers, and your potential customers, etc. And the fifth thing would be to ensure that they have quality access to quality mentors, and not just mentors who are startup mentors, but vertical mentors, right? If you're doing a fintech startup, you want to meet someone like Ravi. You want to meet someone who works in a bank, right? Someone who understands that financial stack. If you're doing an insurance startup, you want to meet someone from an insurance company who understands underwriting, who understands, how that stack works. So all of these things. I mean, this is I could rattle on for a while, but I think I just want to make this more of a conversation. So that's the 5-pronged approach that we're going to do.
And I want to get back to some of those things, especially the talent piece, because I think it's one of those, some people say, unsolvable problems. But we'll talk about that in a bit. But what you described is very similar to many of the other what we call accelerator programs out there, like Nexia and 500 Durians or 500 startups with the Durian program. And how are you different, and how do you differentiate yourself from some of these other typical? But again, maybe that they have that investment portion to it. Yours is primarily about supporting the ecosystem. But how else would you differentiate yours versus some of these other startup accelerators?
Exactly, that's a good question, right? So the clear thing is that I'm. The role that Startfund is going to play is not to compete with these guys, right? So you look at Nexia, look at 500 Durians, and a lot of the other accelerator programs or players we have in the startup ecosystem. They are profit-driven entities largely, and they are here to grow. In a sense, it's profit driving the startup ecosystem, which is great. Right, we need the private sector and capitalism to sort of drive this forward. It's the way it works in Singapore. We need more. We need more Nexias. We need more 500 startups. Right, we need more 1337 ventures. Right, my job is to sort of enhance what they're doing. Right, so it's to create better connectivity between all those stakeholders and to increase that interface between the aspiring entrepreneur. Right, so if you look at Startfund's mission. While I'm building a Malaysia startup registry today, to look at how many startups we have in Malaysia from a retroactive perspective, which isn't very many, to be honest. Active startups anyway. The real work comes when we try to track startup creation in real time. So how do I get tomorrow's entrepreneur to database himself? How do I get the entrepreneur next month who starts a new fintech startup to database himself? We need to surface these guys so that the government agencies and their programs and all these other stakeholders that you mentioned can intervene to provide that sort of turbocharging that these early stage startups need. So that's really what we're doing.
And what is it for you? I mean, how do you sustain yourselves, and what's the business model for yourself? Because I mean, it seemed to be a lot of giving. But very little taking.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's nothing works for free, right? So for us, it's think of a social enterprise, think of an impact enterprise, right? We're not a profit-driven entity in the sense that I'm not as the promoters, me and my partners. There is a fair bit of passion that's driving this. So as long as we have an operating budget because we need to be sustainable. Something like Startfund only grows more valuable with time as the network effects grow, which means that we don't want it to collapse or cave after 5 or 10 years, right? We want it to be a going concern. So that sustainability is important, but it's capped to the operating budget of Startfund. So we envision a team of about eventually 10 to 15 people, working very much like similar organizations in the UK, like Tech Nation, or Startup Estonia, SG Innovate or Enterprise Singapore. A lot of these are government supported in those countries. I think we can do it. Government support is great, but we want to be private sector sustainable as well, right? So that's why we're structured like an enterprise. Yeah.
Fantastic. And we're going to take a quick 30-second break, and we'll be back. We're going to talk about the domestic ecosystem a little bit, and I think that was one of your five-prong mantra, right? Which is to redefine the ecosystem. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to just check out Nicole, and we'll be right back here in 30 seconds. Welcome back to Rethinking Balance Sheets. And if you haven't got your copy of Nicole, it's Mother's Day, maybe get one for your mom, right? Go to nicole.app and download your Nicole. It's Android and iOS and friendly on the desktop also. So again, Nicole is a bite-sized learning tool, and we have a community there called Rethinking Balance Sheets, where we talk about some of the issues that we bring up over here. So we're going to talk a little bit about, we're talking about the startup ecosystem, and one of the things I think will be very interesting is exploring this domestic startup ecosystem, right? We had Singapore yesterday, or last Friday. Seems like yesterday, right? We had Singapore, Jaya, come in yesterday, Friday, last week, talking about the Singapore ecosystem. Talk to us about the Malaysia ecosystem. How does it compare to the Singapore one? But more importantly, what works and what doesn't work in our ecosystem?
Ooh, it's a loaded question. So I think, look, we have an ecosystem, right? According to my database, we have about 150 startups in the last 5 years that have been funded by some kind of venture capital fund or similar type investor, right? So we have an ecosystem. We have produced, no matter what the naysayers say, I say we produced Grab, right? This not necessarily by any policy intervention, but this ecosystem, this country produced Grab, right? And a bunch of other startups that I think on their way to becoming unicorns. Startups like Carsum, startups like Aerodyne, right? Great companies, right? But I think there's a tendency to maybe not to say rest on our laurels, but to say, we're doing okay. We just need to make a few major tweaks. Do we really need to do we need to make a step change, right? But to put things in perspective, every country has a natural entrepreneurship layer, right? If you take a percentage, if you take 1% of, let's say, that's not the number, but if you take a percentage, every country has that natural thing. If you go to Ghana or Nigeria, you'll have the same thing, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So then when you play their population wins. So Indonesia is going to win because they have 250 million people. The US is a given. China, India, all the big countries win, right? Even Thailand wins because they got 100 million people. But you want to look at the countries that have done outside per capita.
Correct. The outliers like the Scandinavian guys and also Singapore and so on. Yeah.
Singapore. Estonia has had 5 unicorns.
Yes.
And they have a population that's smaller than KL, right?
Absolutely.
So the question is, how have these companies on a per capita basis done 3x, 4x, 5x beyond that natural layer? And ultimately, it boils down to policy interventions, right? You cannot run away from the fact that that is because it's not natural. It's something that has to be, sort of created, right? And then we look at our nearest neighbor, which is Singapore. And Singapore has a lot of things, but they do a lot of things that are right.
Yeah.
Right. It's the basic things. It's the simple things, right? So our ecosystem functions well, but if I were to say, what are we lacking in right now? If I could just do a quick 1-minute evolution of where we started with the startup ecosystem and where we're at now. So in 2014 or late 2013 to 14, we had the creation of a new government agency called Magic, right? It was led by an ex-Silicon Valley stalwart of sorts, so that experience, that exposure. At the same time, we had the establishment of the 500 Durians Venture Cap Fund. And Kylie Ng was just giving out checks, right? You also had a very prolific cradle under the stewardship of Nazrin, who was also working together. So these and then you had a couple of VC funds that were being funded by MAVCAP as under the Funds of Funds program. Guys like Gobi, guys like Elixir Capital, and so what happens was that these funds at that time were 10 million, 20 million US dollar funds. They were giving out small checks to early stage startups. Right? I entered the startup ecosystem at that time, where getting 100,000 US or 200,000 US was actually, you could do that off a PowerPoint slide, and a good idea, right? And that led to this. That's where the ecosystem started. Really, the ecosystem that you see today started there. It was this mushrooming of new startups. It was many new startups being created, and everything was exciting. Circa 2017, 2018, a lot of these funds decide that they want to increase their fund size. They want to now do $50 million funds, $100 million funds. But it's hard to disburse a $100 million fund when you're doing it in 100,000 checks, right? So now you need to give bigger checks. Bigger checks means you need to go further up to less risky investments, Series A, Series B, Series C, which means that the early stage startup, that funding ecosystem dries up. Right? Cradle doesn't disburse as much anymore. No more 50,000 grant, no more 100,000 grant, no more 150,000 grant. Cradle does a minimum of 500 now. Yeah. And you're not getting that off a PowerPoint slide. You're not getting that with a small prototype, right? You need to have some significant traction. So that's where I think we have sort of, the engine has stalled, right? Which is why you see the same startups in all the different accelerator programs, right? We used to have this thing called grantpreneur. Now you have acceleratorpreneur, right? You have the same guys just going around. It's small, and that's the biggest problem. We're small. So I do commend the My Digital Blueprint, because whether they've addressed how to do it, they've set a KPI: 5,000 startups created by 2025, and that's a KPI that Startfund wants to get behind.
Yeah, there's a lot of criticism on My Digital, the blueprint. I mean, part of it is that we talk. Malaysia is known for its full of talk and full of blueprints and full of strategic imperatives, but have very little in terms of execution and the policy and the things that you talk about, right? And one of the things you talk about is talent, right? And that's always something that consistently. I mean, you talk at an SME level, startup level, even at a corporate level. That's always been something that people rally and get upset about, and they blame it on the education system, that we're not producing enough of that. But I mean, if you look at some of these outliers that you talk about, Singapore, Estonia, and others, right? I mean, a lot of it has to do with that ability to access this digital nomads, ability to access this the really smart brains of the world. China too, right? If I happened to be there 99 to 2008. And in China, it was like everybody, we're bringing the entire brains of the world into China at that point in time, to enable them to start thriving and being able to have that the brain downloads and the enabling the Chinese population to understand what's happening in the world and managerial capability and so on and so forth. That is sorely lacking in our country. I mean, to some extent. I mean, how is that ever going to be addressed? Because it's not something that we can address, right? I mean, it's really a governmental policy issue, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely, right? I mean, how much can I do? How much can you do, right? So let's talk about the stuff that we can do, like the ecosystem can do, right? So, for example, if I was, I'm in Europe, for example, right? I'm 21-year-old programmer. I love Asia, right? I've always wanted to take a gap year. I want to come to Asia, right? I start Googling, but the first place I'm going to go is either Thailand or Singapore, right? Thailand because of the beaches, and Singapore because, I can get a good startup job there, right?
Yep.
But that discovery happens on the web. It's easy to find. I'll have to start up jobs in Singapore, and it's just a one location that I can go to there that I can at a glance I can see what's on offer. Thailand a bit easier because I can just rock up there with $30 a day, and I can sort of bang around until I find something, right? Yeah. But Singapore is where it's interesting. They have these digital assets that can be marketed as a one stop, right? So we're going to be doing that, right? We're gonna try and figure out a way to get startups to post their jobs and collapse that into a single digital piece that someone like MDEC, for example, can promote internationally, right? So not so much Startfund, but startup jobs in Malaysia, right? This is what we want to promote, right? Then you come to the domestic front. Where are our tech talents, right? Well, we probably never had much to begin with, right? But where they are right now, there are a couple of places where they're hiding. One is all the MNCs, right? The MNCs have identified these guys through the various hackathon programs that the MNCs do. It's not to come up with new startup ideas. These corporates use hackathons, for example, as recruitment tools, right? And they pay them a nice salary, $10,000-$15,000, and you absorb them into the tech stack
ecosystem.
Into that company, right? Then you have the super startups, the iPrices, the the Grabs,
iFlix,
whoever, iFlix, and all that. Again, they suck it up. And then you also have the international startups, right, that come here and sort of locate their Malaysian offices here. There's that. And then you have those, those that are freelancers. So these freelancers want to work independently. They make a lot of money on Upwork. All right, where they earn $30 an hour, $40, $100 an hour, right? So it's good money, right? Sit at home, work from a Huckleberry, cafe, and
sounds familiar.
These guys are pulling in 10, 15, 20,000 a month, right? And the fourth category of where our tech talents are lying are with the agencies. And I say the agency model, I mean, some enterprising chap said, I'm going to get a bunch of developers and programmers. I'm going to put a graphic designer in there. I'm going to have a 10-man team, and I'm going to go to startups and tell them, I'll build your product for you. It costs me 40,000, but I'm going to double it and charge the startup 80,000. Right? So they're making great money building because they've just sucked up all the talent. Right? So that's where the tech talent has gone. So now the question is, what do we do next? Right? How do we create 5,000 startups when even if you need 4 tech people per startup, right? You're looking at
20,000, which you don't have.
Maybe, Arvind, if I ask you a question.
Sure.
You talked a little bit about Singapore. I think that's one, just a passing comment. I always think we don't talk about competing with Singapore. I think we should leverage off Singapore. It's a first world country at our doorstep. It's a huge benefit to us, and how we use it is probably another discussion. But the other thing that is interesting is from the Singapore perspective is I think NUS had its first unicorn recently. And where do universities play a role in this? Where have you seen our universities playing a role in it? Is there anything happening there?
So the universities have a huge role to play, especially if they look at, because all of them have computer science, faculties and even deep tech related faculties, right? The universities have a role to play, but the universities are still very much in an R&D mindset, right? Which we're not in an R&D mindset anymore. We're in a how do we use technology as an enabler together with a business model and get customers kind of mindset, right? That mindset is missing from our universities, right? We are very much R&D, which means that researchers are just doing research without asking the first question: should this research even be done? Can we actually commercialize this? Commercialization is a post fact, right? They do the research first. Should we do this, and should we be able to play sepak takraw in space or something like that? And then can we make money of it? Comes as an afterthought, right? That's not what Singapore does. All the universities in Singapore, for example, have been directed into very specific areas: nanotech, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality. But in terms of talent, right, the universities just need to have a better pulse on what's current, right? So, for example, Python programming, it's a programming language, right? I don't know. There's no visibility as to how many thousand Python graduates or programming graduates that can do Python are being churned out every year. We don't know those things, right? That would be a great source. 20,000 actually, guys, it's not that much. If you look at 20,000 over 5 years spread out across 10 universities, it's only a couple of hundred per university every year. We're not looking at insurmountable numbers. It is actually very doable at a governmental level. It's just you just need
the wheel, right?
That's entirely it. It takes 1 year to train a good programmer, a couple of languages, to train him in a stack, spend the money, train these guys, and in 5 years these guys will be clamoring for a job, right?
Yep. And it will I completely forgot that Ram Munyandi is also a startup CEO of Asia Mobility, right? He's
Hey,
on the
Ram.
show. He says hello to you, Arvind. Kelvin also on the show. Kelvin Teo. And a number of others were there. So we were talking just now, I think, on this challenging talent ecosystem that we need to start figuring out how to crack this ecosystem. And I think there's no real answers. I think it's a lot of like things, people like you, right? We need doing little bits of things. I mean, these are things like, for example, getting all the directory of startup jobs and being able to market them to hot young talent across the world is something that if you think about it, it's really something that the government should be putting some emphasis and doing. But I guess in Malaysia it takes entrepreneurs like you to get things up and running.
Maybe Roshan, if I just comment on that, that's actually one thing that Arvind just comment a little bit on that. Reality is this, guys. Governments to an extent, it's why the capitalist economy is fantastic at creating wealth. It's thousands of us doing different things and trying it. No government can actually figure it out. It's not really all, Comrade Ravi, Comrade Roshan, and Comrade Arvind here, right? It didn't work, right? It just doesn't work, right? So it's a lot of us trying different things. Like Arvind rightfully pointed out, many of us failing, and that knowledge then gets accumulated. What works, what doesn't work in the real world, not somebody sitting in a government agency trying. I mean, the wonderful thing was when we built the Plus Highway and Ministry of Transport still, decided where Malaysia Airlines flew, and it was still flying daily flights to Ipoh. It's faster to drive to Ipoh by the time you go to Sun. So it just doesn't work, right? It doesn't work. So it's a lot of us trying different stuff. And that's, what we continue to need to do is each of us trying lots of stuff. Yes, government can be a facilitator, no question about it. But a lot of it is about, stuff like we're doing here today.
Sure.
Trying out stuff may work, may not work. But then from the time, like you said, from the time we started this show, the ideas have started to evolve. Even for our own businesses, we had a chat last Friday. It's beginning to evolve. So I think the stuff that Arvind's doing is commendable, and we just need a lot more of it. And just talking about it is an eye opener again for me today.
Yep. And we're going to take another quick break, but Arvind, we're going to come back and talk a little bit about the startup, not the ecosystem, but what can startups do? How can they get support from you? What should they be thinking when they start something up? So we'll just take another quick short break, and we'll be right back here to the final segment of Rethinking Economics here with Arvind and also with Ravi Navaranam. We'll be back shortly.
Woi, bro.
Apa dia?
Aku message kau 50 kali, tak balas.
Alah bro, aku tak ada time lah bro message aku sekarang tengah Nicole bro. Nicole lah, itu dia in sekarang. Tengah trending tengah kacau.
Kau cakap apa? Apa tu?
Nicole, kau tak tahu Nicole? Google kau tahu? Nicole kau tak tahu? Tak, Nicole app untuk belajar bro. Semua tengah belajar guna Nicole sekarang.
Ilmu
semua tengah guna Nicole.
Share sikit lah.
Boleh bro, kau tengok macam ni bro.
Okay.
Kau kalau kau lembab, kau kena Nicole bro.
Memang aku lembab sikit sebenarnya.
Bro, kalau kau nak laju, kau nak top, kau nak jadi CEO, kau kena guna Nicole. Kau tahu kan pergi mana? Digital.dynamic.org. 200 je bro tahun.
Aku buat tu aku tak lembab dah.
Tak tahu bro capacity kau macam mana. Tapi aku rasa Nicole ni boleh tolong kau lah bro. Confirm.
Okay. Berapa?
RM200 je bro tahun.
Boleh lah duit raya pakai ya.
Selamba bro. Ni kau tengok ni bro. Cahaya bro, kau tengok ni. Ini daripada Howard bro. Power bro. Oi,
memang cantik.
Apa ni? Jangan ambil apanya.
Okay.
Aduh.
Sorry. Aku teruja sangat lah.
Ni tak apa-apa, kita kongsi.
Welcome back to Rethinking Economics, and we're talking with Arvind from Startfund. And one of the things you guys do is to help startups to grow, to scale, to enable them to ultimately, hopefully, become unicorns, right? And that's one big question we have in Malaysia. We look around us, and everyone has unicorns, including Singapore and Thailand and others, and Indonesia especially, quite a few. But Malaysia continues to be just like that gold medal in the Olympics, and it just eludes us in spite of having and the World Championship in badminton, in spite of having a whole bunch of badminton players and so on. We just can't seem to get that one thing off up and running. But let's talk a little bit about the startup successful startups, right? So one of it is definitely to have a good idea. but there's millions of great ideas out there. What other factors are critical, for startups to be looking at in terms of enabling them to get to that point of ultimately scaling, getting traction, and hopefully getting to the point of being the first unicorn in Malaysia?
Yeah. So I think this country suffers a bit of PTSD from Grab going to Singapore, right? I mean, because that dominates so much of the conversation.
I think Arvind, also to be fair, I think if Grab stayed here with the funding ecosystem and so on, would they have become a unicorn? So that is also another big question, right? Would Grab have become a unicorn if they had continued to stay here? I'm not sure what the answer is, right? So that would be the flip side to the equation, right?
So I think big companies go wherever capital is. I mean, the largest companies in the world are domiciled out of Ireland, right? The US government does, boo hoo hoo, they don't get the tax revenue, but that's the way it is, right? For all of Singapore's investments, Grab listed on the NASDAQ, in the US, right?
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
They didn't list in the Singapore Stock Exchange, and Singapore is looking at them going, oh, we did Grab, and then now they're in the US. So I think that's just going to happen, right? Companies are going to go where it's expedient, right? So what we need to be doing is to ask the more pertinent question, right? If I took 100 Malaysian startups today and I put them in Singapore where their funding ecosystem is better, does that mean all of them have a shot at becoming a unicorn? Because fundamentally, you become a unicorn when VCs afford you as a private company. So unicorn is a private company that has a valuation of more than $1 billion, right? You are afforded that valuation based on an investment that a VC makes, right? So when they make an investment, they're pricing it at a particular round, right? In order to do that, there must be there is a science to it. It's not agak-agak lah, There is a real science to it. A lot of these startups are making, by the time they get those types of valuations, they're making tens of millions, if not, hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue already.
Yep.
Right. So the only way you do that as a Malaysian startup is not to grow your business in Kuala Lumpur and then figure out your strategy to go to Kuantan and Kedah. You know what I mean? You have to be thinking extremely big, and fundamentally, why Singapore startups have an edge, because they know that they can never survive on the domestic market. It's global from the get-go. And if you notice, all of those Nordic countries that we talked about, Estonia, Taiwan, Hong Kong, wherever these startups are coming from, they don't have the cushion of a large population, all right, that they can rely on. So that's the global mindset from get-go. And that even when you start thinking like that from the get-go, your business model changes, right? You have to start using more and more digital. Yeah. And your usage of technology, because you have to now think, if I'm going to sell something, I've got to sell it online. I have to sell it on a platform like Amazon. I have to go global, right? So when that mindset changes, right, then VCs start taking an interest. Because let's face it, right? If you want a unicorn valuation in your software as a service startup, for example, right? The rough, you have to show a path to $50 million a year in annual recurring in annual recurring revenue, right? So that means that if you're charging $20 for your product, right, that's millions of customers, right, for your software as a service. You're not getting this in Malaysia, right? So you have to show that global mindset, right? And I think that's where the question is: how do we ignite startups? How do we grow? It's about changing the mindset and saying, can we create a product that is less Malaysian centric and more global centric? So we have a lot of Malaysian corporates, for example, having a hackathon, say, hey, I want you to solve our corporate problems, right? But really, our startups and our entrepreneurs need to be solving global problems, not the problems of Malaysian corporates, many of which by US standards are SMEs. You know what I mean? You take Sunway, big company in Malaysia, great company in Malaysia, good employer of Malaysians. But when you convert the market cap to US dollars, they're SME out of Kansas, It's we have to look at the scale of things, right? And I mean these are the hard truths of it, right? I mean we do someone mentioned recently that Grab was bigger than Maybank. They're going to IPO at a valuation that is bigger than Maybank.
Oh, they're much bigger than Maybank. They're probably bigger than quite a few of the banks put together at this stage.
Exactly.
So at least all the state enterprise banks. Yeah.
So this is what startups do, right? They go into an existing market. They collapse the market, meaning that if, Astro, for example, would charge a blended ARPU of 100 ringgit per month, right? And that's the market size, right? You have 6 million customers, 100 ringgit a month. That's the theoretical maximum. Someone like Netflix comes in and says, I'm going to collapse the market. I'm going to charge 50 ringgit. That means I've destroyed the theoretical market size by half, right? But I'm going to, because I'm charging as little as I can, I'm going to dominate this in terms of market share. So startups need to be thinking in that mindset, right? I have to give you a better product, and I have to do it faster and cheaper. Without that mindset, it's very hard to, now if you are solving a big problem like in Beyond Meat, where you sell these vegan burgers, Bill Gates has invested in it, right? Now, of course, today, if you walk into Jai Grocer, that burger is 40 bucks and you're thinking, this doesn't make sense. Who's going to eat a 40 ringgit patty, right? But trust me, if there was no path with economies of scale for that burger to be cheaper than beef one day, Bill Gates would not have invested in it, right? It's just that comes with scale. That's what our startups need to be thinking in that mindset, right? How do I get the scale? And if the scale is there, the Singaporean VCs, they will come to Malaysia, they will find the startups, they will invest in the startups. Because they, Ravi, you know this, right? When you own a fund, your pressure is to disburse. You want to disburse. They want to give the money. It's just that they can't just invest in rubbish. They have to, there has to be good, metrics to invest in. So I think that's where the focus should be.
Very interesting. Ravi, your thoughts? Sorry.
I think, like I said, it's not, but I think there's also a conversation a little bit about history here in Malaysia. When you talked about Astro, the success of originally is that your ability to get a concession, like it or not. That was the 90s model in Malaysia. And I suppose as we begin to shift away from it, and we can see that, it's not going to work. But we've had our successes. It's not that we haven't had success. Asia is, whatever said and done, is a tremendous success of entrepreneurship on where we've gone. Even if I looked at the old, the recruitment company, Job Street and so on, they were great. They are great companies. It's not that we can't do it. It can be done. It just, I think a lot of it's got to be that mindset. It cannot be, let's go run to the government, let's get a concession, etc. mindset. Let's think. The world is our market, and just start thinking. But I'll tell you something that you said about talent, which it's crossed my mind. It's just an observation, right? My nephew being one of them, worked in with Lazada and so on, and he started his business. But there are a lot of wealthier kids today, which not unlike us. When you graduated, go out, get a job, kind of thing. Their parents can sustain them, right? And there are quite a few of them around. And I see them in the startup scene, and they're all pretty well educated. So it's not that we don't have talent. Hopefully these guys come back from Australia, UK, US, where they go to study, probably the wealthier kids, come back and have a go. I think that's probably one of the sources of these entrepreneurs going forward.
And go ahead, Arvind. Yep.
Sorry, so Ravi, you hit the nail on the head, right? If you look at entrepreneurs, a big reason why startup entrepreneurs ultimately, if they fail, it's not because really they fail per se. It's because they didn't have the privilege or the luxury to sustain themselves, and they had to go back and get a job, right?
Funny, I've been reading a book on universal income. It's a paper we're going to write shortly, and one of the things is that free time and to do what you like. We wouldn't have Charles Darwin wouldn't have found his theory on evolution if he didn't have the money. He was a rich guy. He could afford HMS Beagle, went around the world, and came back after his expedition and wrote the theory, right? So again, I suppose that part of it that people can afford either not have profits, sit down, think, and solve problems. You can't have daily pressures of jobs and things like that. If I'm looking for my next meal, I can't be thinking about solving these issues. And that's something which is interesting, that universal income may be one of the ideas to solve these kind of problems.
Yeah, and there's another thing, right? I mean, you just talk about expectations, right? And this dovetails into a conversation about what is a tech startup versus an SME, right? So why do we even, I've actually met government officials who say that why do we need to differentiate them, right? And the simple reason is you need to differentiate them because the business model is different. One is a traditional business model, one is an uncertain business model. The funding sources are different, the training is different, the metrics are different. We talk about rethinking balance sheets, right? In an SME, balance sheet matters. In a startup, a balance sheet, it's turned on its head, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't make sense.
Well, it's there. It's that intangible.
It's there, but it's intangible,
intangible,
right?
which hasn't been measured. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's so it is important to define these things. Now, if you talk about is entrepreneurship accessible to anybody? For an SME, yes. Anybody can start a burger stall. Anybody can start a restaurant. You can start a hairstyling salon, right? And this is great for creating jobs. This is great for economic multiplier effects. But if you want to talk about tech startups, there's a different outcome here. This should be measured by the government in terms of digital adoption, right? If you want every Malaysian company to use a cloud point of sale system, a cloud POS, right? The government cannot mandate this. This has to be done by a startup like StoreHub, by a startup like Slurp. It is these guys who go and pound on the doors of other SMEs and says, please use this tablet and do that. So to me, as a country, why should we care about startups? We care about startups because they are the engine of digital adoption, right? Create more startups, digital adoption will come, right? It's just, it's profit driven, right? So we need to create these startups for the purposes of digital adoption, but also because SMEs have a narrowing scope as we get bigger and bigger, as we go forward into the future, right? If you take Astro, it's a narrowing scope. If you take most of the Malaysian, listed companies, the top 50 or the top 100, their share prices, with the exception of rubber gloves and a couple of opportunistic counters, right? Their share prices have either stagnated in the last 5 years or declined. Yeah. And this is not inflation adjusted, yeah? So we look at that traditional business model, our economy is actually shrinking, right? The only way to sort of grow that pie is, well, one way anyway, is to look at startups, because startups offer outsized wealth creation, right? You get a grab right, and even if it lists in the US, and we want to keep some of the jobs here, we want to keep some of that hold here. It's outsized creation of wealth.
Absolutely. And I mean, just to close out, I mean, what can people do? Because we're really out of time. What can people? I mean, Startfund, right? How do people approach you? What are you looking for? Do you want startups to come connect with you and start the dialogues? And what can you offer to them? Just to wrap this whole thing out.
Sure. So very simply, all right, you can go to startfund.my. The first thing anybody who's interested in the tech startup ecosystem can do is to register, right? You can register using your email, or you can do a LinkedIn registration. That's the conduit, right? That allows allows Startfund to connect with you when we have a new product. When, for example, we have a Malaysia startup registry that will go live. It's in beta at the moment. We're going to go live in the middle of the month, right? And we have put startups that we think are active. But there might be an entrepreneur out there that says, hey, my startup is not in this registry. Good. You'll be able to, if you're registered with Startfund, you'll be able to create your startup profile in there. This will be for visibility, right? But also because we want this kind of accurate data so we can feed this data back to the government, right? We also want to create a community around the startup ecosystem. So anybody, if you're a student, if you're an aspiring entrepreneur, if you're an ecosystem builder, if you're just interested in investing in startups, register on Startfund. That's the first community we want to grow. If you want to work in a startup, register on Startfund, right? Everything else, once that registration is there, then as our platform grows, when we do something with the academy, when we do something with jobs, when we do something with with the registry, we have a startup graveyard, which is we're hoping to, all the startups that have died in the last 5 years, we're hoping that we can sort of get more learnings from the founders and document those learnings so that it's not lost, right?
That's fantastic.
So So we just we're trying to create a knowledge base that the ecosystem can benefit from. We're going to create a directory of mentors, right? So we're not going to let people run around anymore and say that I'm a mentor, and make all these wild claims. Not just me, I'm not God, but a cohort of ecosystem builders and our advisory panel. We want to nominate people as mentors. So we got a directory of mentors. We have an investor matching tool, which we're going to really accelerate once the border opens. So a lot of exciting things planned for Startfund in the next 12 months and the years to come. We're also going to be trying to work with a lot of government agencies to streamline things. One of the things that we are trying to build is actually a single sign-in at events. So you won't need to keep signing in all the time. Every time you go to an event, just key in your Startfund ID and you can attend events, and want to work things out there as well. So long story short, register at the Startfund website. You can do that quite easily, and yeah, stay tuned. We want to create this community.
Fantastic. And Ravi, your final thoughts before we wrap this up?
Well, I think we'll just have Arvind here in 6 months' time, and we'll see how he's going, because I think this is a conversation worth continuing. We're going to have some more speakers a little bit on this startups and things. Look, crisis is the best time to start startups. So when you ask me what's your thoughts on crisis, well, it's the time for startups. So a lot of new businesses grew during the Asian financial crisis, Asia being one of them, if you don't forget that, around that period. So Sapura as well, part of Sapura Energy came out during that period as well. So lots of stuff happens during a crisis. So here's a great thing. So in 6 months' time, hope to have Arvind back on the show and share what's been happening.
And so there you have it, startfund.my. The link is right there. Have a look at it. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Selamat Hari Raya for everybody celebrating. We'll see you on the 21st of May. It's been fabulous. Arvind Patmarajah, thank you so much for your involvement today and for giving us some insights. I think some questions, some great questions to ponder, especially on the role of government and policy in terms of driving the startup ecosystem. Some things we can answer, some things we can't. But I like what you said, Arvind. Let's control what we can control, and let's do as much as we can in the areas that we can access, the areas that we can change, the areas that we can impact, and the areas that we can transform. So here's to you. Have a great weekend, everybody. For those in Malaysia, I think many of you in lockdown, enjoy your time at home again, and we will see you next week. So we'll see you on the 21st of May, same time, same place. Goodbye, everyone. And thank you again for tuning in to Rethinking Balance Sheets. We will see you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.